40 points at last year.
Well, another team that we was kind of hope when we expected them to be more competitive than they were Mercedes. They looked underwhelming in qualifying compared to the big four. And kind of the race was a lot more of the same. So what do you guys make of it? There was a lot of negative comments coming out of George Russell after the race.
And physically, they look disgusting. George Russell's car is the biggest eyesore on the grid. It looks like something out of Dr. Seuss or a Black Eyed Peas album cover.
What are you talking about?
Green with on the black. Oh, that's
you're
hideous.
You're not a fan of the black and green.
He deserves to have DNS just for having that disgusting color scheme.
I love that helmet he's got, man.
Oh, no, I love that helmet.
It looks like I don't know. It looks like a mint lolly just chilling. No,
I love that
no
car.
good.
Mate, the only podcast that
3-1, mate.
Yeah, I think that's the sexy car. A sexy not car. I like the silver more than I like the black, but I like the helmet. Yeah. The only thing that irks me is that it's so similar to Lewis's helmet, like a fluoro green, fluoro yellow.
The fluoro yellow looks nice. That green is just ugh.
Strong words, mate. First pod in a long time. Strong words coming from Tom about helmets. I'm a fan.
It's green. It's greener than the green screen.
Do you have any depth of knowledge about Mercedes apart from their aesthetic?
Well, I wanted to pose a question to you. What's gone so wrong with as I was saying before, they had so much momentum going to the back half of the season. Mercedes, like for the past 10 years, they've been so on the ball with it. They've gone with great innovations and stuff. How have they gotten it so wrong with this design for the car? Because it doesn't look like they've changed much.
Can I change your question a little bit? Because I don't think that they've got it so wrong, because they've actually had a very big increase this year in pace, but they're still comparative to everyone else. Everyone's 0.6, 0.7. Aston Martin's 1.2, but they were pretty slow last year, so that's relatively, it's still in that comparative range. The biggest thing is how much pace Red Bull has got, and maybe this is a conversation for another time. But 2 weeks ago, I said when they got in trouble for their breaches, that even with the sanctions that were going to be handed down, they would have already got the advantage based on the development of the car taking place so long ago. And we've seen that car right now is going to take a lot of stopping. And I think they're laughing right now at the sanctions that were handed down, because their car is so far ahead that at the very best, all those sanctions are going to do is make them, 10 seconds ahead at the end of a race as opposed to 30. So I said it weeks ago, they needed to go harder. They needed to kind of freeze people out of a workshop for 30 days. So you physically can't continue developing the car, because the way that they've done it, there's no incentive for other teams not to, based on how competitive they are right now.
I think if you look at every team that has gotten better this year, every team that's gotten better this year has sort of quote unquote Red Bullified their car. The teams that have made this probably the smallest gains: Mercedes, Ferrari, McLaren.
So Mercedes have made the fourth most gains this year. They've made 7 tenths.
Well, last year they couldn't drive because they were porpoising. They were driving. They were jumping over a diving board.
Yeah,
would you say?
Yeah, but when you say 7 tenths, it's 7 tenths from Bahrain. The rate of development for their car throughout the season was huge. Do you know what I mean?
So what?
So they were.
Oh yes, yeah, I get you.
Yeah, it's not from the end of the year.
Yeah, I get that. I
for me, it's going to be an interesting case study. I think I said it last week about Aston Martin and them running the same engine, same gearbox, same drivetrain. The Aston Martin is a Red Bull somewhat clone with the Mercedes power unit. The Mercedes is a evolution of last year's car. One thing that I think is interesting that they're saying is that they're severely lacking downforce. And it's interesting that they're the only car that has this no side pod, this zero side pod philosophy. And they're saying, we're so down on downforce. I think it's going to be a case of, twice the pride, double the fall. They had an off season to develop a new body kit that was, a Red Bullish replica, we see that the power unit is is competitive against that Honda. So now I'm interested to see if they have another kit that'll be coming in, like when the European season starts, a whole new side design. That has to be the case, because the gap to Red Bull is too far to, within 2 years, if Red Bull stayed stationary, I think, to find, parts that they can add to this zero, concept. I think it's going to be, all right, what can we do now? This, change this, especially because that design last year was built to run so low to the ground, that whole concept as well. And we saw last year that to raise the cars have been mandated to be raised again this year. It doesn't look bad. It just, for them to be losing out on pure race pace to Aston Martin must hurt their pride a lot. Because
could I ask?
Sorry, keep going.
Can I ask a question about the optics of the sport based on this race?
Most excited I've been for the sport in probably 2 years.
The most excited?
Yeah.
Based on the optics of the race?
Yep.
I liked everything about the race except for the race up front. And the race up front depressed me by the end of the race.
But I think I'm used to having depressing races at the front, but I think
everything. I'm not worried about
top two.
I'm not worried about where. Like, I don't actually. This conversation isn't about where teams are finishing. It's purely based on building anticipation for a season, and then after the first race, I would love to see the odds of Red Bull not to win the championship right now, because I'm sure after that race they're already pretty low.
I think it's a lock.
But if what did you say?
I think it's a lock.
If I'm Formula One and I see this, obviously, we've spoken about how Formula One, the formula, doesn't want to deviate from the path of coming to spec, or kind of, it needs to keep its DNA of engineering, of development, etc. But if I'm Formula One and I'm the decision makers in the sport, do I have to start thinking about some kind of handicap or ballast system to peg the grid closer together? Because you cannot have a season like this when the seasons are getting longer. The seasons are getting longer so that they can make more money. You cannot have races that are this drawn out and gaps in the field that are this wide. So some kind of balance, some kind of disadvantage, like competitive disadvantage, that's the same for everyone based on, previous race performances or championship standings or whatever it is, I think needs to be put in place to keep more teams in the hunt, to keep it more relative. It might make it a little bit more novel.
I think that's naive.
But DRS is a novelty in it.
I think that's naive, because if you think about most of the years you've followed Formula One, like you look at the Schumacher era, totally dominant. Like especially once he started winning, totally dominated by Ferrari. Like ridiculously dominated by Ferrari.
I understand that, but we are talking right now about are talking right now about an industry that was once.
Can I finish my point?
Yeah.
So then you have the Red Bull era, other than maybe 1 or 2 years in that 4-year stint. I think it was maybe 1 year, totally dominated by Red Bull. Mercedes one was blatant. It was pretty easy. And then now we've got Red Bull it looks like they're on, the runway for another sort of era like this. I think the difference is that at least, like, especially with the Mercedes era, there definitely was a problem with the midfield battle and cars being able to follow each other to actually make the rest of the show interesting. Red Bull are dominating because they built a great car and they've been able to, work on, perfecting that car. Having said that, as they continue to dominate, they're going to lose a lot of aerotime comparatively to the other teams. So it's not. I can't foresee it being like a 6 or 7 year, reign of dominance.
So just to bite back a little bit, most teams made up 0.6 of a second from last year to this year.
Yeah.
Most teams, Ferrari, Red Bull made up 1.1 seconds. So they're still 0.5 ahead in their development this year. So we're saying that with reduced aero time next year, these teams are going to make up 5/10.
But why? It's because the two other teams who we're measuring them against have stuck with inferior aero concepts by all metrics.
So my argument is this. I don't care. So like, I understand that they're doing a good job and they should still be in with a chance to win the championship. Like, that is not, like, I'm not denying them that. But if you're Formula One and you have now got a much larger audience, because we can make the argument that in the past, Formula One was dominated by successful teams, successful drivers, McLaren, Williams during their time, Ferrari, yes, all these kind of things. But you're talking very much to, you're preaching to a converted choir. Whereas now we've got this kind of sport that is a lot more novel, a lot more accessible to everyone. If I'm a fan, or if I'm someone that's interested in the sport and I'm watching someone win by 35 seconds to their teammate, who's won by another 10 seconds to the third place car, right? That is not the look that you want Formula One to have. And we've seen a lot of other. Let me finish. We've seen a lot of other categories. You've seen a lot of other categories have some kind of ballast or disadvantage system that still allows those teams that should win to win, but it keeps the spectacle much better. It keeps it much more engaging for the whole season. And as the season gets longer, I mean, imagine if we have another season this year when the race is tied up by, with 6 races to go, because that's a real possibility.
But at the same time that you're saying this, you've got like a sport like NFL, where a lot of the new fans are coming from, which has been totally dominated by the New England Patriots until very recently for like 2 decades.
Because it's
not the same at all. Because sports like the Premier League, where it's dominated by 2 or 3 teams, these things happen.
But Joseph,
you can't punish best in class because they're excellent. You can try and implement things to bring the grid together. But if the teams don't want to implement the best aero philosophy because they're set on some path, and it's baked in, we believe. I
swear to God, sometimes I feel like you argue just for the sake of arguing.
But I think
how is NFL
points.
at all relevant to Formula One? Because on any given
sports
Sunday,
can survive
the other
with teams dominating.
Huh?
Because sports can survive with one team dominating.
The sport only survives. Well, that's a system that can be improved. Just because that's how it's been doesn't mean that's how it should be.
Can I make a point on that though?
Thomas,
if you look at all the Grand Prix, they're getting sold out like hotcakes. Like the Australian Grand Prix was sold out within a day, or 3 days, let's say. So they're still bringing in fans. Like people enjoyed 10 years of Mercedes.
His argument is how long can that survive that's true.
Thomas, I understand that, but the saying expand or die is a real one. And right now they're still capitalizing on the exposure of the sport. But as the market grows and the novelty wears off and you become more exposed to Formula One, I mean, for granted, you have 2 years. It's probably been helped by COVID that there wasn't an Australian Grand Prix. So right now it's doing very well. But if you have 2, 3, 4, 5 years where you've got procession-like racing, particularly at the front, does that start to disengage people?
I want to hear Harry's point, but all I'm going to say is, other than the 2 Red Bulls running away, there was no procession-like racing in that race at all. I thought it was a pretty good race in terms of overtakes. Like I said, this is an anomaly race. The Ferrari should be better when we hit, the European tracks and tracks that don't have such extreme temperature conditions. I mean, it's up to them to.
I think based on last year, saying that this year, based on all of last year, saying that this race is an anomaly is naive.
But it's a desert race. There are always anomalies, especially for these Ferrari cars, apparently.
Yeah, well, Ferrari was.
I'm happy to be proven wrong. What's your point, Harry?
Look, I guess to your point that it's an anomaly, Ferrari did lock it out last year and Charles won the race. But I'm hoping, because we've raced there so many times in the last 4 years, that it is an anomaly just based off the fact that Red Bull would have all the data. I know all the teams would, but Red Bull's probably the most well-oiled machine on the grid other than Mercedes. I'm hoping we go. I'm not worried about Jeddah. I'm not looking forward to that race at all. But once we start hitting Melbourne, Imola, and all those sorts of tracks, that we start to see some competitiveness come back. Because I'm with Anth. If Max takes this out of Canter and by, he's 200 points ahead at race 10, I think we could start seeing a huge drop off in popularity at the sport because, I just think us as fans will start tuning out, and the Drive to Survive fans won't stick around if it continues like this for years to come.
That won't be a bad thing, though.
Thomas, you purist.
I think
I stopped reading comments these days.
I'm worried.
I think
it's
I think
only
you should
one
be
race in, but I told you straight away in the morning, Harry. I told you, like, I hope it's an anomaly, but if that trend continues, it will be.
Can I say something? If
Struggle
McLaren won every race of a season, you guys would be sucking each other's dicks. So let's stop.
No, you know why, Joe?
100%.
No, don't start making just stupid comments for the sake of it, because sports are only worth following if there's like competition.
No, but you started saying the same thing about Premier League this year because Chelsea's having a bad year.
Joe,
there are people
who
Joe,
I'm going to leave it there because you just talk so much crap sometimes. It's actually annoying.
No, but you're making the same arguments.
Can I say Fernando for world champion, by the way?
We've got to talk about him yet. We've got to talk about these guys. He made so many good moves last night. He looks no older than a day over 21. He's still got the youthful exuberance of, a newly crowned F2 driver. And yet he's,
I just say that isn't a surprise because Alonso is an 11th stripe. That guy, regardless of whatever car he's in, drives the wheels off it, gets results that he shouldn't be getting in it, bar the 2016 anomaly McLaren car. But
mate,
even in the
seen
Alpine,
his race in Baku with that car still, mate.
The Alpine last year, like he made that. I'm still of the belief that it was a good car, a solid car, but he was getting results in that only he can extract from it. He's like Fernando Alonso through his whole career has always been a cut above a lot of drivers.
He's always picked underachieving cars as well and done
exactly. Yeah, he doesn't have.
If he made good decisions in
life,
he doesn't have good judgment.
Doesn't have good judgment calls, but he has always been a driver that will extract everything out of the car. Like he doesn't need them to be perfect for his conditions. He will extract it regardless.
Tell me that overtake on Hamilton wasn't probably one of the best overtakes you've seen in probably the last 3 years.
And then he tried it again on Carlos.
And I mean, number one, the confidence he must have in that car to pull off that move down there sort of speaks volumes in itself. But watching him race, I think watching him race today is what gave me a bit of excitement for this season, because I think Red Bull's going to run away. I think that's a given. But at least if we can have
it's going to be an anomaly.
If he can nab a win or two,
I think they're going to come first and second every race this year unless their car breaks down. I think they're so far ahead. I'm just saying I hope it's an anomaly.
And you're arguing against my point.
No, what I'm saying is it's not their fault that no one else has adopted that.
Did I say at all that it was their fault? All I said was, if I'm Formula One, in the spirit of competition and in the spirit of the optics of the best optics for the sport, then they need to have a system.
Mercedes dominated for 8 years. You think they're going to change their mind after a year and one race?
And they change the regulations to address that
after 8 years.
What about
20 when that started?
I know you don't talk about IndyCar anymore, but all you have to do is look across the Pacific to that great category, and you have 6 drivers. That's why I've zoned out to do a Formula One and gone over there, because it's entertaining. You have multiple teams going for it. I think if Formula One can adopt something like that model, not make it completely stock, but bring the field closer together so you do get mixed results. It won't happen with Formula One.
We didn't even give Fernando his due. We were still talking about him. Then Anth got triggered again.
Can you imagine if Max and Fernando go head to head for I know it probably won't happen, but imagine the shithousery that would happen on track with them two racing side by side.
It wouldn't last more than 1 year together at a team.
But you know what as well, thinking about this, Aston Martin has the money behind them to keep developing that car. They've also got aero time to keep developing that car. Last year, I spoke a lot of smack about Mike Crack and what was he doing at that team. But I think he's definitely
his last name. That's what he was doing.
Yeah, he's definitely proved me wrong.
Yeah, I'm sure
they've got this new, I lit a fire under his ass. They've got this new development center coming up very soon. They seem to be getting. They've got Fernando there now. They seem to be getting all these ducks in a row. I'm not saying it's this year.
You know why? Because they got a wind tunnel this year.
Well, I said the McLaren wind tunnel won't do much for him. Maybe I was wrong. You know, I'll concede that one. But I'm saying they're getting all these things in it, like all these ducks in a row. It might not be this year, but if they can build themselves a solid platform to keep making these improvements, they're going to have more wind tunnel time next year over Red Bull. Like, this is the beauty of at least this whole wind tunnel concept, is that you are going to punish Red Bull, and they're going to have to think very hard about, you know, these implementations of. Sorry, H, go for it.
I was just going to say, I've been the biggest critic of Stroll on this podcast. I think
good job.
90% of the time, I think he's horrible. But this weekend, he showed a bit of ticker, because I always thought he didn't have any, because, you know, everything was given to him. He came in, his hand was busted. He could barely turn the wheel, and he still pulled out a P6.
Yeah. I was thinking about you the whole time I was watching it. Like, every time I think of him race, I always think, whenever I say Stroll, I think of you, because I give him a bit more plaudits than you do.
He nearly freaking wiped out his teammate on the second corner. I'll say that. He nearly killed both their races. He nearly strolled it.
Doing it.
Strolling ball.
That's it. Well, you know what the good thing about Formula One is? We only got to wait till the 20th of March for race number 2, and it's going to be at the enthralling circuit by the sea in Saudi Arabia, without
my favorite race,
without a single proper braking zone. Although there is a spoon curve, so I can't wait to watch that procession. It's going to be carnival time in Europe, so everybody's interested in a good procession by then. So that will be great. But the Racing Line podcast comes back to you with episode 71 next week, when we break down the first race of Gen 3 in the V8 Supercar season on the streets of Newcastle. Gnarly as new cars, new liveries.
How hyped are we for this? I
want to go.
Can't wait.
Are we hyped?
We're hyped.
Oh, extremely.
And we're going to bring the noise next Monday night.